big idea of what I'm going to talk about today and over the rest of this month. Sabbath is about so much more than just resting. Yes, we're talking about Sabbath. Yes, in fact, the tie-in today is we're talking about Sabbath, but we're also talking about freedom. But Sabbath is more than just resting. It's about us hearing the heart of God and focusing on the things that really matter. So starting today, what I would like for you to do is I want you to only work the mandatory hours at your job. I want you to step away from the extra, and I want you to take that time, and I'm challenging you to go home and be with your family. Because here's what I expect to happen when you do this. Marriages are strengthened and restored through time spent together. Relationships with your children become deeper when you spend time with them. God will give some of you favor on your job, and it may be an increase in that job. Or maybe a door will open for you to have a different job when you trust in God instead of trusting what you can do with your own hands. I recently read a story about this. It's a true story of some third-year medical students. They had finished up anatomy. They had finished pathology, physiology, and pharmacology, and they were beginning to think that they were real doctors. These were young med students, and they were going through the process, and at this point in their education, it was time for them to study radiology. And so what they did is they went in and had a teacher that was showing them x-rays, and he put the x-ray up on their first day of class, and he said, "Do you see anything wrong?" The x-ray just kind of looked normal, and the students were quiet, and they didn't have an answer. So the radiologist began teaching them the fundamentals of reading an x-ray. The patient was female. She was 20 to 40 years old. Diaphragm was normal. Heart was not enlarged. There were no infections in her lungs. There didn't appear to be any tumors. And one of the students asked about the patient's recent history. The radiologist professor said, "You know what? That's a good question. She's had a cough for a few days. No fever, no chills, no weight loss or gain, no night sweats. There was nothing in the patient's history that would suggest anything was wrong except the common cold." And so they're looking at it, and the teacher has it up there, and he's just waiting on them to figure it out. And an hour goes by, and they can't figure it out. They can't see what is going on, and it's what their textbook said was one of the hardest x-rays to ever read, and that was a normal one. So they were about to break for lunch, and the teacher could tell they were getting frustrated with not being able to see anything wrong and thinking that it was a trick question. So he said, "You know, this film was read by the doctor in charge of the emergency department and the radiology resident on call. And the one this morning also read it, and you know what? They came to the same conclusion as you are. There's nothing wrong. This is a normal x-ray." Then he threw the twist. He said, "But I called the patient to tell her I think that she has cancer." Well, now the students are intrigued. Lunch is out the window. We've got to figure out what's going on here. And the radiologist, gave them a hint because they went for a long time again, couldn't figure it out. He said, "Here's a hint. It's not something there. It's something missing that bothers me." They look at it again. They still aren't seeing what it was. And finally, he gave him the reveal by asking him a question. He's like, "Where is the patient's left collarbone?" And they looked, and it wasn't there. The left clavicle was missing. They never looked for it because it wasn't there. The patient's collarbone had actually been eaten away by cancer. The point is, what's missing does matter. What's missing, what's not there. A lot of times you can look and see when something's wrong. You can identify, okay, that's wrong. If that person had a broken arm, on an x-ray you look, you can see the bone is supposed, I don't know how to read x-rays, but if I look and see the bone is supposed to be like this, and it's like this, or it's like this, that's not right. But when something is missing, it's harder to identify. But what's missing does matter. We have a problem in our church culture that Sabbath has gone missing from our lives and from our routines. When God created light, he called it good. When he created the mountains, he called them good. When God created the vegetation, he called it good. When God created the animals of the sea, he called it good. When he created the birds of the air, he called them good. When he created humans, he called us very good. But when God created the Sabbath, he called it holy. And you'll see in our text today, he commands us to keep it holy. 1964, World's Fair, New York City. Right in the middle of the space race. There were so many technological advances. The world was really just taking leaps forward from the previous 50 years even to the technology of the 1960s. Some of you remember the space race and how exciting it was, and all these new things that were coming about. This was after television had been in the home. By the 60s, just about every home had a television, and you know, this was during that time when this technology was booming. Sociologists began to predict that because of all of this technology, there would be a problem. You see, in just a matter of a few years, they predicted that with all the new technology as fast as it was coming out, that we as a society would move to 3-day work weeks and 4 months worth of vacation per year. That this was making things so much easier that we would have all this time on our hands and we would just spend it going on vacation or only working a few days a week. And here we are, almost 60 years later, and this is nowhere near true. Technology has done actually the exact opposite of that. Instead of saving us time, we waste more of it. Now, granted, there are things that are a whole lot easier. Things that I don't have to remember. My technology that I carry in my pocket saves me brain space from having to remember phone numbers. If this ever goes out and I got to call somebody, I know like 5 phone numbers. It's trouble. But you know, it helps us to do things a little bit easier, and we can multitask. But what ends up happening is when we have that extra time, we become consumed with wanting and doing more. We want more. We do more. I remember even in my own lifetime when things stopped 1 day a week. 1 day a week, things were closed. Gas stations, grocery stores, they locked their doors every night and all day on Sunday. Many communities had what were called blue laws. Have you ever heard of blue laws? Anybody know what blue laws are? There's a few nods, a few hands in the room. Blue laws are laws that are restricting or even banning certain activities on Sundays. There were certain things that you just couldn't do on Sunday. Now, be sure, on Independence Day, I'm certainly not in favor of more government laws trying to pass and legislate people into righteousness. But it shows you of a time when people respected the Sabbath more than they do now. The pandemic changed that somewhat, but it didn't fix the problem. The pandemic gave us more time than we knew what to do with, but it didn't fix the problem of spending that time with God. Stores were closed, but it wasn't for scriptural reasons. Even as things open back up, there are many of us, and myself included here, that are annoyed that certain 24-hour stores are still closing at certain times. I'm spoiled. There's times when if I'm up at 1 a.m. and I want to go shopping at Walmart, I want to go shopping at Walmart. That's what's happened to me. Now, it was a rare occasion, but when I'm working youth camp, which happened the last couple weeks, and I want to go get something at Walmart, it's just not there. We get spoiled being able to do that because we are a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week culture. And this isn't new. 30 years ago, when I was in high school, one of my teachers, my history teacher, as a matter of fact, he's one of the football coaches, he made a joke that he really wouldn't be able to make today. He said, "Man, you're so dumb, you had to ask what time the 7-Eleven opens." And of course, me, I'm confused. I'm like, 7-Eleven's open 24 hours a day. I was too young. I didn't realize that the reason it's called 7-Eleven is because it was only open from 7 to 11. So even 30 years ago, his joke was outdated. But now Walmart's only open from 7 to 11, so we should start calling Walmart 7-Eleven. No. But like the collarbone in the x-ray, something has gone missing. There's something missing. And as we're coming out of this global pandemic, we have an opportunity to get this right. We have a chance now, as the world has been reset, as our nation has been reset, and we're chomping at the bit for things to get back to normal. This pandemic is this generation's cataclysmic event that changes things like never before. In the same way that September 11th, 2001 changed the way we travel, this global pandemic has changed the way not only we travel, but the way we do life. And here is our opportunity as believers in Jesus, as the church, to take back and reclaim the Sabbath that God has designed, and He laid it out for us to do so, because God designed us to rest. We have been given the opportunity, we have been given the designation of rest. Right after creation, 6 days, God then created Sabbath. He gave us a pattern to live by. There was evening and there was morning the first day. Evening, morning, next day. Evening, morning. It's how it went over and over and over again. Hundreds of years later, the people of God had forgotten Sabbath. And our first text, we're going to look at two passages today, but our first passage is going to be in Exodus chapter 1, beginning in verse 6. Then Joseph died, all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. The time of prosperity, the time when Joseph was in charge, he was the second in command in all of Egypt. And so Jacob moved his family down there. That time of favor looking upon the sons of Israel, that was over. Years and years and years had gone by, and now the Egyptian culture had changed who they were. The way that the Egyptians did life actually changed this God's chosen people, and it was obvious now that they were slaves. They were slaves, and the Egyptians made them work every day of the week, 7 days a week. God's chosen people were slaves to the Egyptians' wants and their schedule. And it was obvious that they were slaves. It was a physical slavery, that they were beaten and they were worked. But what's happening today isn't so obvious. Here on the weekend that we celebrate our nation's independence, we are held captive by our own desires and habits. This time, it isn't an external force. It's not a foreign oppressor that has put us into slavery. We are slaves to a society that we created. I'm beginning to see our society parallel the Israelites and how they were back then. You see, what ends up happening is I'm not going to dig into that portion of the Exodus, but you know the story of Moses and the 10 plagues, and God's people were led out of Egypt, and God gives them their freedom. But it isn't long before that they have their freedom before they begin to complain about it. And they begin to complain and saying that they had it better in Egypt when they were slaves. God gave them their freedom, yet they wanted to return to where they had things that were more routine. The responsibility of freedom was too much. They were taken care of when they were slaves. They were free physically, but they were bound mentally. God led them out of bondage, but they were still in bondage in their minds. Regardless of how we've gotten to where we are now, God wants us to experience the freedom that he's given us in his Sabbath. You ever had a time when your kids were misbehaving in public and you had to pull them aside and discipline them? I mean, now some people, y'all don't pull them aside. Some people, y'all are just like, whack, 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 whack. That was my mom. But there were some times when that little, grab me and chase me in a circle with the spanking, that wasn't going to do. There were times when I had to get pulled off to the side and had to, I was then grounded. I was then in trouble. It was something more than just an immediate. Well, that's what God is doing in a sense as he prepares the children of Israel to the promised land. He pulls them aside and takes them into the wilderness. Now, where the pyramids of Egypt are, which was one of the most popular centers of that culture in the day, that's Cairo. And I looked it up on Google, and if you were to travel by car from Cairo to Jerusalem, it would take you 8 hours. One day. And you'd probably, about 4 hours in, have to stop and get gas and try to find a Buc-ee's so you could get some of that good food that Buc-ee's has. If you haven't experienced Buc-ee's, do it. If you're traveling, it's great. But 8-hour trip from Egypt to Israel, from Cairo to Jerusalem. Well, of course, they didn't have cars back then. There's no way they were traveling that fast. So, camel. By camel, it would take about a week. 1 week to go from Cairo to Jerusalem. Okay? There's 1 million people. So everybody doesn't have a camel. On foot, it would have taken them a month to get from Egypt to the promised land. But God delayed the arrival of his people as he was delivering them. He took them for a 14,600-day journey through the wilderness to have a conversation with them and to purge that slave mindset that they had. That entire generation, everyone over the age of 20, had to die in the wilderness because of their lack of faith. Because they had been given the keys, the doorway into the promised land, and they didn't have enough faith to claim it, they were led in the wilderness for 40 years. But during this leg of the journey, God gives them the law. During the time that they left Egypt, before they inherited the promised land, God gives them the law. And the law was their constitution. It would recreate their culture. It would design how they would operate moving forward. And by following this law, they would learn to trust God more than they ever had before. Now, they would be given additional laws to total up around 613. But God had a top 10. And he gave them his top 10 in the second portion of our text today, which is found in Exodus 20. Beginning in verse 1. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. So goes the 10 Commandments. It's obvious that we prioritize these commandments. I mean, I'm quite certain that we all understand you should not murder. That is something that is pretty gruesome. That's something that we know we should not do. Lying is frowned upon. We understand that to bear false witness or to tell a lie is wrong. Stealing is considered unacceptable in most civilized cultures. However, Sabbath, that one kind of gets normalized. Forgetting the Sabbath, that one, that's normal. We just kind of push that off to the side. But it wasn't always that way. For years, Sabbath was a priority. It became part of the Jewish lifestyle. They observed Sabbath in the Old Testament during the reign of some evil and wicked kings that led them into idolatry, yet they still maintained the Sabbath. When they were taken away into exile in a foreign land, they still observed the Sabbath during that time. We'll see next week how Sabbath was used in Jesus' day. There's going to be some specific things we're going to talk about next week with Jesus and the Sabbath. But Sabbath would eventually, it would outlast the Roman Empire. Sabbath was observed on Sunday eventually in reverence of the resurrection of Jesus that took place on Sunday. So it shifted, and Jewish people still celebrate a Sabbath on Saturday. As Christians, we celebrate it on Sunday for the most part. There's a few exceptions in there, but we have moved Sabbath to Sunday in honor of Jesus' resurrection that took place on Sunday. But Sabbath crossed the ocean with the pilgrims who were in search of religious freedom. Sabbath survived our Civil War. It's still practiced when women won the right to vote. Sabbath survived the Great Depression and was still prevalent at the dawn of the space age. It's only in recent years that Sabbath has been ignored. And I completely believe that the decline in our culture is directly connected to our lack of respect for time with God. Things have become so easy that we fill that time, instead of time in the Word, instead of time in prayer, instead of time of reflection, instead of family devotions, instead of any number of other times that you could spend with God, it gets filled with as much other things as the enemy can place in our hands, in our mind, in front of us. And I can hear it now. Well, those other commandments affect others. This one doesn't really hurt anyone. Obviously, we don't kill people because, you shouldn't do that. But, not honoring the Sabbath, that one's just a me thing. But that's how the enemy does it. He gets you to justify breaking something that seems benign, and then he deceives you into more sin. And more, before you know it, you're in so deep that you don't even know how you got there. Look at it this way. Losing a day of rest each week from our lives has a profound effect on us. 1 day a week adds up over time. 52 weeks in a year, so if we take 1 day of those weeks, that's 52 days per year. That comes up to 7 or so weeks. Or you can take it over the span of a lifetime. The average lifespan is around 77 years. And in 77 years, 11 years of Sabbaths. Take 11 years away from anything in a lifetime and you will notice a significant difference. We're suffering today because we've lost Sabbath and we don't even realize it. But remembering Sabbath will return us. Remembering the Sabbath will bring us back to a life that is God-centered and a life that is healthy. In 1972, a man named David Green built a craft store. It was the first craft store of what would become more and more craft stores. His initial plan was to stay closed on Sunday so that his employees and their families, as well as their customers, could have the day off. But he got scared. There was somebody else who was opening a chain that was going to rival him, and that one was open 7 days a week. So he caved, and he ended up opening his store 7 days a week to match the competition. Years went by, and you know what? His business thrived. It grew, but David was convicted about having his business open on Sundays. We've heard the saying, the customer is always right. But God told David, I come before your customers. 20 years he operated this way, and his business was successful. It continued to grow. In fact, the numbers showed that Sunday was his most profitable day of the week. He was selling $100 million a year on Sunday alone. But David was still convicted in his heart. He prayed. God gave him the faith. And when his business was doing the best that it ever had, he closed the busiest day of his week. David said, that's when our business really took off. You see, David started with a $600 loan and 300 square feet of retail space. But today, Hobby Lobby has over 900 stores and 43,000 employees. In 2019, which is the most recent data that I could find, in 2019, Hobby Lobby was ranked number 79 on the Forbes list of America's largest private companies, with revenues exceeding $5 billion. David's story seems dramatic because of the numbers that are involved. When you start talking about something in the billions, it kind of gets your attention. When you say a name like Hobby Lobby, it's something that your ears will perk up because you like to go. And I'm at a kind of a weird place with that. The closest Hobby Lobby is far enough away that Lindsay's not there all the time. So I want his business to be blessed, but I also, we have enough craft stuff. She doesn't need anything else. But here's the thing. It's dramatic because of all the big numbers, but it's no less dramatic to be a single parent without enough hours in the day to get everything done. It's not any less dramatic than a college student who has a big exam on Monday. So it'll be okay. I'm not going to go to church. I'm not going to spend time in the Word today. I've really got to take this test, and God understands. He wants me to pass this test. So I'm going to put God on the shelf until after I get past this exam. And it becomes easier and easier and easier. Or maybe it's a child with a busy sports schedule on the weekends. We've got tournaments, and these tournaments are just for a small season. I understand. And trust me, I get that. Man, I am not begrudging anybody who takes time to be with their kids, to be with your families. It is important. There's too much in this world today where children are being neglected, where families are being torn apart because they're not paying attention. What I'm saying is, it's not easy to develop a Sabbath rest culture, but it is extremely rewarding. Will you stand? What I want us to do today, as we're looking into the remainder of July, as we talk about Sabbath, we're going to look at it from different perspectives. This was the beginning. This was the Old Testament. This was the Ten Commandments where that law was established. We want more out of God. Oftentimes when we come to church, we want to experience Him, and that's what we say. We want more. God, I want more of You. I want to know You more. I want to experience more of You. I want to be filled to the overflowing. If you've been in church for years and years, maybe you think back to that time when you first experienced God, and it was just overflowing out of you. You had to tell everybody that first love feeling. We want that. We want more. I want more. I raise my hands, and I'm ready to receive more of what You have for me. And oftentimes God is saying, you know what? I want more. You want more of me? I want more of You. I want your time. I want your heart. And that's the greatest thing that we have to give. And it's the thing that God wants from us the most, is our heart. And if you surrender your heart completely, your time can be surrendered a whole lot easier. It's harder to let go of that time when you're holding on with some of it with your heart. But being completely submitted to Him is completely submitting our will to His. As I pray today, if you have need, this altar is open. You can come down. We'll pray with you for whatever. Physical, emotional, spiritual, you just...